really glad to welcome you all back to the third day of the Cinema Annual Film Festival. We are so glad that you're still here with us because we have a lot of exciting screenings, panel discussions, and masterclasses planned for you. So, Cineville began with the aim to bring the mainstream audience into offbeat and novel cinema. We are so glad that we have found people, we have come across people like Ravi and Tathagata who are supporting us in this vision. So I would like to express our gratitude to them at this point. Also, a little bit about our panelists. Ravi Shankar Kaushik is a self-taught filmmaker who has honed his skills by participating and winning numerous time-bound filmmaking competitions while also working full-time as an IT engineer. Having returned to the country after a stint in Singapore, he is currently writing two feature films set to release in 2022. A Berlinale Talents 2021 alumni, Tathagata Ghosh has always believed in telling stories of people from different social backgrounds. Having completed his Bachelors in Mass Communication and Videography from St. Xavier's College, Kolkata, and his post-graduation from Vancouver Film School in writing for film and television, he has been constantly honing his craft for filmmaking for the past 8 years. His short film, Miss Man, has traveled to numerous prestigious international film festivals like BFI Flare, Tallgrass Film Festival, Wicked Queer, International Documentary and Short Film Festival of Kerala. So I would like to begin with the first question of this panel discussion we have based on the topic of a search for identity in cinema. How do you, as filmmakers, ensure that the lived experiences of marginalized communities are told authentically and sensitively?
Tathagata, do you want to go first?
Okay, sure. Well, thank you, Nishtha. Thanks, Ravi. Thanks to Harsh and everyone at Film Tantra for this amazing festival. I'm loving the festival. I think great curation. And in a time like this, when we are totally shut out from the entire world, I think films really help us in seeing a ray of hope in our day-to-day world. So I'm really glad that we are here having this discussion and watching some amazing films. My best wishes to all the filmmakers. And thanks for inviting Miss Man to be a part of your wonderful festival. I think, Nishtha, well, first of all, I think representation is a big part of this whole process. And by representation, I mean, working with people from the community as well. Well, there are a lot of layers to this question. I think, but the two most important aspect, which I really always maintain, especially working on my own film, be it Miss Man or the films that I have made so far, I have tried to have people represent themselves when I'm telling their own stories. So suppose in Miss Man, two of my main characters, Orgho, who played the protagonist, and Ratrish, who played the trans woman mentor character in the film, both of them are from the queer community of Kolkata. And I think this is very important because I feel there are a lot of talents out there who want to be a part of the narrative, because usually I have seen films, LGBTQIA plus films being made, and they are mostly, working with people who are not from the community. I think this really does not give the film the authenticity. And honestly, your film really gets elevated by leaps and bounds when you involve them. Like those of you who have seen Miss Man here, who are watching us right now, the whole narrative structure of the film that was on paper and that we finally see on screen are so different. And that only happened after I involved Orgho in the film. And Orgho is not an actor, by the way. And usually I have seen directors or filmmakers who are sometimes not patient enough to work with non-actors because I think it's just like a limitation that we have. Though Orgho has not acted before, but he has had a lived experience of the incidents that we see in the film. So when I didn't have to direct him much. I will use the pronoun he because he prefers to use the pronoun he for himself. So he does not use, he didn't need, direction from my end. I just needed to like say the basic technicalities of filmmaking, like stand here, look there, this is the mark, this is the light and all that jazz. But other than that, it's mostly, I got so inspired by him that sometimes it felt like I was shooting a documentary at times. It didn't feel like a fiction because the whole montage structure of the film and all that, it actually evolved because of my numerous interactions with Argo while we were preparing for the film. And that crept in the film gradually. So I think your film really gets a tone of authenticity by involving people from the community if you're making a film on them. Also, one thing is very important that I would like to do in my next productions is that also involve people in your crew who are from the community. This is not practiced much as well. I mean, but there are a lot of interesting people who are willing to work, who are willing to collaborate. So I think definitely Miss Man has opened my eyes in a lot of aspects. The concept of gender fluidity, like the concept of identity is so broad that it's not only about the film that you are making, it's also beyond the film that you are making. So I think these are few things that I will keep in mind. These are takeaways from me as a filmmaker, as a human being, most importantly, by making Miss Man. So I think representation is a big part of doing it right, because the moment you involve people from the community and you really make it, like a true, it only becomes a true collaboration if you work that way. Otherwise, I think it just becomes very one-dimensional, and it becomes very shallow. And also, I'd like to point out one thing, not taking away from the performances from the wonderful actors who have done portrayals. I think it's mostly the filmmaker's duty. I see many films which depicts transgender characters. And I have seen especially when I have seen the portrayal of trans women in queer narratives, cis men play trans women, and mostly the discussion when the film comes out in mainstream also, or in the niche, if I may call it that way, the discussion mostly remains about how the cis male actor has the way he has worn a sari or he has dressed up, and it does not translate beyond that or him winning an important award or something like that. Usually the pain, the struggles, that really does not come into forefront, those discussions. But you are making a film essentially to create a dialogue around that and not to celebrate. Of course, I mean, award and all, that is just one part of it. That is least important in this case. Usually it should help really create a dialogue, a discussion around their lives. And usually that doesn't come to the forefront, and that really troubles me. So I think it's really, on the filmmaker's part to make them more involved and make it, like a true collaboration by looking out for talents and making them a part of your narrative. So yeah.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I mean, I think it's absolutely like 100% right what Tathagata just said about representation and how it becomes more about the performance by the actor than the actual story sometimes, right? Which you rightly pointed out. And I think it's just about, it comes down to the core of being sensitive to what you want to portray, being sensitive about who the story is about, right? Like in Chuhedaani's case, it was a story of a woman, right? And it was, more about like somebody who's suppressed and oppressed, and we see people like that around us. It wasn't something, so it's just being observant about a few things, it's being sensitive about a few things, and it's, again, for me also, it comes down to who you have in your crew, who you're working with. So the lead actor in this case, Bhumika, she's a doctor, and she was out in one of the village, during the part of her internship with the hospital, where she actually had, when we decided to make this film, right, she spoke to a couple of her patients who came down, and she could, just the way they conduct themselves, the problems that they face. And so, yeah, I think what he kind of captured it all, Tathagata rightly, is that it becomes filmmaking is a team thing, right? It's not just one person. And what you write is different from what eventually comes on screen in one way or the other. And that's where the contribution of the team comes in, and how your crew and your actors and what they bring to the table. And how, as a filmmaker, you are open to that. You're sensitive to what the feedback is, and where they are also coming from. And as he rightly said about the representation part, I totally agree with that. My film as such didn't have that scope right now, but totally the point. In future, if I am kind of looking at that, that'll totally be the way to go for me as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I just cannot express how much I appreciate this awareness that because there has been this debate going on, about actors either doing their job, just acting out the parts, or hiring actual people who belong to that community. And it's actually a layered idea. The concept, it's a layered concept. It's multifaceted. You cannot just boil it down to, oh, they're just acting. So any capable
Right.
actor should be able to represent a character.
I think Nishtha also, I would like to mention a name of a documentary here called Disclosure. It's on Netflix, and if any one of you haven't seen it, must watch it. It actually shows that how the trans community and also the queer community at large has been wronged for many years by Hollywood. By wrong depiction of the way the transgenders have been depicted. It has created transphobia rather than actually making it better for them. So I think this is very important. And it's not also, I'm not blaming the actors at all here. Actors, as you correctly said, actors have done their jobs. It's the filmmakers, the directors, the producers part that they should, be more welcoming and embrace the change and be a part of the change.
Yeah, actually, I think one really important point that you mentioned was in most mainstream movies, when we see, or in most films actually, when we see a trans woman, it's mostly played by a cis male actor dressed up as a trans woman. And I think this has come up in recent times that when there has been a sex reassignment surgery in some films that I have seen. There was one recently that I forget the name of. Only then, when the sex reassignment surgery has happened, the trans woman is played by a cis woman. It's still not a trans woman, but it's a cis woman now because we still identify, the physical nature of a body with gender. So I think that was a really important point that you made, Tathagata. So moving on.
I think it speaks about how
Yeah.
the filmmaker is looking at the whole process also, right? Because why didn't they go out? Like, let's think on in that sense also. It means either they themselves don't have either the confidence, or just reaching out to the community becomes the first thing, right? If you Sound of Metal, like for example, the film that just came out, right? They had people from the actual community playing a lot of roles, and they also led a lot to the film itself. So the same way, it's for the filmmaker to be open about, if you decide to make something about a certain specific community that you want to represent on the screen, it is your responsibility to then also reach out to them and not make something out in vacuum, something that you just sit at home and think about and assume something about a community and try to show it best to what you think it is, while it might actually be different from the reality, right? So, and even though, I mean, fine, I would say, let's say, for whatever reason, you might not have the actors, for everything that you want to cast, let's say, but having somebody on your crew, on somebody in your team who can at least ensure and give you that perspective, right? So you don't misrepresent also becomes a huge thing, I think.
Agreed, absolutely so.
Yeah, I completely agree. So moving on, I think I want to talk about how both the films relate to a person's strive for freedom, liberation of sorts, the freedom to identify themselves and have other people identify them as they wish, expressing their individuality. However, there isn't, the common phenomenon that the main character, the protagonist, actually stands there and explains everything. to everybody. There isn't much of that. It's a much more subtle. Both films are much more subtle in their representation. So with Tathagats, the music is very significant, and with Chuhedaani, there is the metaphor. There is actually the protagonist is quiet for I think almost the entire length of the film, but the actions are very loud. So I want to talk about representing them in a way other than just dialogue.
Ravi, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So in my case, yeah, I mean, I think it was totally about Meena, the character, being in a place where she doesn't have even the opportunity to be vocal about her life, right? She hardly has any place to vent out to, be it, I mean, she can't vent out to her husband or so. Yeah, it all comes down to her capturing all of that anger inside her, which then eventually comes out the way it does, right? And so for me, yeah, I mean, there were hardly any dialogues. I think I don't think maybe the script had like a couple of dialogues at all for her. It was all very visual because I envisioned that how Meena, like it was totally guided by her situation at that point. Like I didn't see her because if she was, venting out or renting out to somebody she knew or a friend or maybe then, maybe the output would have been completely different. But in this case, it's just that pent up anger, which kind of keeps building up, slowly simmering, and then eventually it leads to what it leads to. Yeah.
Well, I think for Miss Man, actually, the sound design was very important, obviously, apart from the narrative and the performance. And that is something I worked for a long time. And usually I have a brilliant sound design team, Anindit Roy and Adip Singh Monkey from Calcutta. They have their own studio here, Oral Workstation, where the entire sound work is done. And I collaborate with them for my films. So I actually, when I write a script, I also write sound cues in the film because I think I'm a person who respond to sound very actively. And since I have grown up in suburbs, I didn't grow up in the main city of Calcutta. I just stayed away. I think that really crawls into my narrative visually. And I think I try to do with as much less music as possible and create the sound in such a way that it acts like a music. So essentially, when I am actually working on a scene, I try to find out that if I can actually use a sound effect or the ambient sound or the non-diegetic sound or the diegetic sound creatively so that it acts as a music. So the fact that you said, Nishtha, that like the music worked in the film. It was not actually music entirely. The music is actually very less. What you identified as music is actually the ambient sound. It was treated like a music. So even if in the beginning of the film, when the protagonist is dressing up and the father suddenly enters in the room, we hear the sound of people in the adjacent house or in the neighborhood fighting, and there is a commotion and chaos. And actually, that is something I have heard all my life. Like I have seen people fighting in the alley, in the neighborhood from the adjacent house over trivial things. It can be just they're fighting over like a glass of water, or they're fighting who will have their bucket full for the first time when they're approaching a tube well. So this trivial fights that people pick up in my neighborhood, that actually incorporated as a music. So you can feel that it's like. You can feel the tension through those squirrels. So essentially, you don't need music in those scenes. So I try to do with less and less music as possible. And I think since the city of Kolkata was a big part of our film, Kolkata itself is so rich in terms of sound and the soundscape that you don't need to do much. If you just pay, if you just pay heed, you can actually do so much with just the ambient sound. Like there were scenes of the red light area in our film, the brothel, and I actually worked on a project, and I visited Sonagachi, the red light area in Kolkata, for a long time. So I went there, and I studied the sound of that place, the kind of sound that comes from each of the houses, those alleys. and I have picked it up all, and I have used it in the film. So so sound is, of course, I try to use creatively sound as much as possible, and also in this case, which I usually don't do. I mean, I didn't need that, but I think how I use songs also in this film. There are two songs in the film: an English song and a Bengali song. The Bengali song actually is very interesting how I used it. It was not there in the film, and when I cast Ratrish in the film, she actually puts out songs. She sings folk songs or contemporary songs and puts it out on social media. And I happened to hear it on social media. She uploaded it from her profile, from her page. And I heard it, and I was so caught, I was so awestruck by the way the song was sung by her, and it's a folk song, and I felt that it captured the essence of the film very beautifully. So the song just made its way to the narrative. So I treated the song as a dialogue itself and not just a song. So I think that's how I worked with the sound and with the music, with the songs in my film. And I think apart from the visual motifs and other narrative tools at your disposal, you can use sound in a very creative way as well, which I try to do. So yeah.
I think that's a very creative perspective.
Thank you.
The way that you describe using sound as dialogue, and it's very admirable. So next I wanted to ask about how both the films end. So both the films, we just watched them, so this is not a spoiler. They end on a note of violence, so toward outwards or towards the self. But this violence is actually liberation of sorts. And the endings of both the films are somewhat hopeful. They can be considered hopeful. In the more morbid narrative that is present around us in reality. But what do you think happens after that? Is it a new beginning, this ending that you have? And did you have any other alternate endings when you were first writing the film or envisioning the film?
For me, the ending was always this, and just the way of how to reach that end were changed slightly. But for me, yeah, I see it as a hopeful ending. I see it as, kind of it opening up to Meena, and I myself am not sure what would happen next with her, right? Which direction would she go? Maybe she leaves the town. Maybe she blames it on the feud between the two, and I'm not sure, to be frank. And it's totally, but yeah, I do see it in a hopeful light. I do see it as a victory for her to actually get rid, it being her redemption, right? And she making use of whatever resources she had for her to use, and make the best of the situation with whatever that was available to her. And yeah, I mean, that's how, so the ending is totally in a hopeful light, and as a victory for her. Yeah.
Well, for me, actually, the answer to your question is yes and no, both. Yes, because you described it wonderfully, Nishta, that it ends on a sense of it's morbid, it's violent, but it ends with a sense of liberation. I would love to believe that, but honestly, what like we soon realized that in Miss Man, it's sort of an anticlimax in a way, because then after the last scene where it ends with a sense of liberation, where the protagonist, stands up for herself, we see that, there is a scene where she's just sitting and staring into the void with that razor and all. And so actually, it kind of speaks about how, so sometimes we stand up in life, but then we see that we feel like we have climbed the mountain, but then we feel that there is a bigger mountain staring at us, So the climb has probably just started. The ascent is just infinite. And then we climb that mountain and we feel that there is another mountain to climb. So I think our film really ends on that note. I mean, I don't know if I can call it a hopeful. I think the way, especially the situation with the pandemic and with everything, be it social, political, economical, everything, like the way we are dealing with from day-to-day crisis, it's very difficult to actually have, like a hopeful or positive outcome of anything. Whenever we feel that we have reached an outcome, we feel like we have just scratched the surface and there is so much beyond that. So I would say for the protagonist, though in the entire film, it's a constant struggle to discover, to search for identity, for her identity. It's just, I mean, she's as tormented as we are. That at the end of the day, we try to embrace something to ourselves, but then we kind of question the fact that is it really what it is? I mean, or maybe there is something much more than that. So I don't know if I can call it hopeful or optimistic. But obviously, what I would like to say is that definitely standing up for what is right and just denying what is wrong is very important. And that's what the protagonist does. But it's just an infinite puzzle which we have to keep solving till our last breath, I feel. And there is no solution to it, and there is no one way to do it. And I feel as artists, as in any form, as just human beings, as citizens, that's what the situation is. I mean, it's all about facing consequences. Like I stand up for something, I embrace a change, but there will be consequences of that, and that's what happens at the end of the, like in our film as well. Like we try to embrace something, but then we face the consequences of that, and we don't know that how the people around us will respond. And that is what happens also, I feel, that in the film, that we stand up, but then we don't know how people around us will change. So that will bring a set of conflicts that we again have to overcome to reach our next goal. So I think it's a constant process of evolution that way.
Yeah, certainly. That's kind of what I meant, when I was saying that the ending feels more like a beginning.
Yes.
Like it's the issue is resolving itself, but then there's another issue, like you said, when you cross a mountain, then there's a bigger mountain up there.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very apt description of it. So now I think we should open up the discussion to our live audience, and you could answer some of their questions. So Deepak Kumar wants to know, where was Chuhedaani shot?
Right. So I'll give you an answer which will answer, I think, a few more questions that I saw during the screening also. I couldn't respond to them at that point. For me, the film process started from making a list of things that I had at my disposal. Kind of similar to what Meena did, but I made a list of what all I had in terms of location, in terms of actors, and then, the story came, and then the metaphor came, and then, it kind of became the entire thing that it did. It was shot in Rewari. That's my ancestral home. It's in the condition as we see it in the film. I didn't have to do much of set design or do much of artwork there. The house itself is a piece of art. And it was just about, me kind of getting the experience that I've had in my home. So the idea of, the person falling on the stair came because I actually fell on the same set of stairs when I was a child living there. So that's what stuck, in my mind when that staircase came to my head, right? Like, this is where I hit my head. Maybe this is, it just extrapolate based on that. But yeah, so it's shot in my ancestral home in Rewari. And yeah.
I see. So I wanted to, you mentioned the metaphor, So did the movie, did the story inspire the metaphor, or was it the other way around? When did you decide that you wanted to name this film Chuhedaani and, bring this metaphor, Chuhedaani in it?
So the story in the sense I knew it was going to be a story about like power struggle between these three people, where the owner has a power equation going with the husband, and the husband then takes it out on his wife. So that part was there, but the so my bouncing board is my wife, and we constantly discuss ideas, and we have this whiteboard and keep writing things. So that's where she came up with this idea of having a rat in that infested house, and then it drove the entire story, because I'm showing the husband also to be like a carrier of a virus, of a disease, right? And which is where the HIV part kind of comes into play.
Yeah.
And and the whole, the radio announcements and all that. So yeah, it kind of went hand in hand, but the story came first, and then the metaphor came to encapsulate it because I thought it fit right in.
I see. Yeah, actually, I when I was first watching the film, I actually missed that metaphor completely for the first time, and then I had to go back and watch the film because there were a few details that I noticed, like the radio and talking about the plague, the news announcement. So
Right.
it was the second time that I was watching it that I appreciated, every little detail of it. So I
Right.
think that's
Yeah.
really great.
Thanks.
Moving on, uh, there is a question about your inspiration for the film. Where did you first get the idea for these narratives?
I think for me, as I said, it totally started from just making a list of things that I have available, and I think it's kind of an advantage, but also a disadvantage. But as you guys had this competition, Rishabh, right? Similarly, what I have done is participate in like 48-hour film projects or 50-hour film projects, because with a full-time job, it's the weekend that I'm getting to
Yeah.
explore what I can do. And so, yeah, for me, it always comes down to find this is what I have. Now I'm trying to expand the horizon. Now I'm trying to not limit myself and the creativity with, what I have available, and then try to see where I go with that. So yeah, that was where, the jump of the idea came from there.
Okay. What about you, Tathagat?
Well, I think for me, the whole idea actually started, actually what triggered me into making this film. A few years back, when Section 377 was very much there in the country, homosexuality was criminalized. There was a friend of mine who, when he came out to his parents, he was forcefully married off. And I came to know about it a little later, and I couldn't do much then. Of course, felt helpless, and of course, the whole thing was didn't go down well, and not followed. But I felt helpless, angry, saddened. Then, in 2018, when those incidents actually started haunting me again in a way, I started writing the script. So that's how I started. So that was the trigger point for me in writing the, and started working on the film. And then, of course, I finished working on the scripts. It was loosely based on the life of my friend in a way, but then, and I think if you read the script and you see the film, it's completely different actually. And then when I met Orgho or Atrish or Tomogno or many other people been doing my research for the film and doing casting and scripting, a lot evolved. So a lot of, a lot came in during that process. So the inspiration was from my own personal life. And I think that's where my films start from, essentially, that there has to be a personal experience which triggers me to making films, any film that I make. So Miss Man started on that, but it became much more during the process of making it. Even I was shooting on weekends. Like as Ravi, I also had a day job and I was shooting only in the weekends. We shot over 4 weekends, and glad that I shot it that way, because I shot on 4 weekends and I was shooting a bit of it and coming back home and checking the rushes and really thinking and trying to just see how it all comes together, and then working on the next day's shoot in a way. And this is the first time when I storyboarded the entire film, as I usually do. But actually, there were a lot of exceptions, because again, I was working with people, I was working with talents and artists from the community. They offered so much more during the shoot, and I just made myself flexible and spontaneous as well, and just incorporated those shots. And I didn't know that whether I will end up using those shots, those montage sequences that you see in the film. But during the edit, when I all put it together, I feel that I just shot it for my own sake. It's so beautiful, it's so pure in a way. I'll just keep it and not maybe use it in the film. But then I started experimenting and putting together. And during that time also, before shoot, I actually revisited 2 of my favorite films, In the Mood for Love and Tree of Life. And I think those films were really, because they use image so wonderfully, both the films. the lighting and everything. I think it all came together, and it just felt like, like I wanted to give it a dreamlike quality. So that's how Miss Man actually happened. It was the inspiration started from a personal note, but then it became much more in the process. So yeah.
I see. Do you guys believe that because this is also a debate that has been going on for some time. Do you believe filmmakers, since you are working in a creative medium, have a social or moral responsibility to express or to showcase the identities of those communities or people who have previously been left out of cinema?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely for me, that is the most important thing, because I actually, for when I describe myself more than a filmmaker, there is a term which I first heard from Werner Herzog, a favorite filmmaker for many of us, as a matter of fact. He calls himself a cinema soldier and not a filmmaker. And I think that describes many of us in a way, because we are fighting for our people, we're fighting for the people around us in a way. When you're making films, we are really depicting their lives. And essentially, I believe that I am, like making films to give voice to the voiceless, people who do not have a voice of their own. Because in India, when I step out on my street, I will see that from, like from the daily wage workers to the person who is sitting across me in a local train, every one of us has an ingrained storyteller within themselves. Every one of us, if you just ask them to describe their life, they can describe it very, like it will feel like they're telling a story to you. It will not be very dry, but the difference between them and me, many of us, is that they cannot make a film out of that, and we can make a film. So essentially, when I'm making a film, I'm actually speaking for them. So when I'm writing a script, it's many of those things that I have heard from many of those people, it come together in the film, in terms of dialogue or visuals or whatever it is. So essentially, definitely, I believe that when I'm making a film, actually I'm speaking for them, and actually I'm telling their stories. And I think that is the most important thing for me, that I'm working for them. I'm not a filmmaker because I'm telling, it's basically that I'm actually doing a service. I'm their employee, who is just helping them check their narrative on screen with my abilities. So yeah, that's what actually for me it is.
Cool. To me, I think I totally agree with that. But and I also think, like, as a filmmaker, right, when you start working on something, the question of why needs to be answered by the filmmaker first, right? Like, what's the intention behind it? What do you want to show, and why do you want to show? Do you see there's a lot of stuff out there, right? And everything has its own audience, right? Be it a good film or a bad film, one that talks about something, one that doesn't talk about anything. So it totally comes down to the filmmaker itself. How do they see this medium as? I totally see this as a medium of change. I see it as, like I said, it's a way for filmmakers to give voice to the voiceless, right? To take the stories that we come across and put it out. Now, the way might be different for some. Some might the depiction might be a bit different, and so yeah, I think it's totally on the filmmaker. They have to have a certain responsibility also to what they're showing, what it means. Now, it might not go well with everyone, and that's fine. It will go well with some part of the society, and that's great. And that's who your audience is, and that's what the film is for. So it's, and there's audience for everything out there. So yeah, it just, as a filmmaker, you find, we're talking about the identity of the characters, but it's also about the identity of the filmmaker. When you're making something, when you're writing something, what is your identity? It comes out in your own work, right? What kind of films you like and what kind of films you make? What do you talk about when you've been given this opportunity? When somebody is out there spending time to watch the film, what do you want to say to them end of the day? And so it's totally a responsibility of the filmmaker to define that.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. So I think we'll take one more question from the live audience before concluding. Someone wants to know, what kind of mindset do you have to get in to write such powerful and thought-provoking characters? And they also want to congratulate the Tathagat for Berlin.
So the question is for both of us, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So thank you so much for the kind words. Well, I think for me, actually, it all comes from observations from people around me. I think that's where all the stories kind of, as I said, I mean, for me, it starts with on a personal note. And then, of course, once I'm starting to write the script, it all I pick up, like when I'm writing a dialogue. So in Miss Man, there is a line about where I describe how sari as an attire, it kinds of, like it's very fluid. So the concept of gender fluid explored through sari.
Yeah.
That is not, I didn't come up with the dialogue myself. I heard it from a friend, like while I was having coffee one day, a couple of years back. And he sort of suddenly said this to me. I think he was describing, he's a photographer, brilliant photographer, and he actually was describing it. And then I suddenly, heard it, and it just stayed with me. It was so powerful, that line. And when I was writing the script, those memories came back. And for me, dialogue writing is all about that. I mean, it's something also I heard an interview with Aaron Sorkin. He said that sometimes he prefers to go to cafes and restaurants and just sit there, and he just picks up dialogue from this table, that table, here, there, and just stores it in his brain. And when he comes back, he just tries to imitate those sound of those dialogues on paper. So for me, it's just about that. I pick up, I observe people. I think it's very sad time that I cannot travel on local trains or buses that much as I usually do, because those are the places where most of the, especially local trains, where people just talk randomly about a lot of things, and you just sit there and you can have 10 ideas for your film. So I think you just, from those conversations from people around me, films like Lunchbox describe, like there are many scenes in Lunchbox where there are scenes of how local trains, how people around you can actually inspire you to come up with new stories. So I think it just comes from people around you. You just have to look around, and things people just say sometimes in such casual way, trivial way, but they're so deep that they do not even realize that. But it is on your responsibility. It is your responsibility to pick that up and bring it to narrative. So for me, I just pick up from people around me and try to write them down, and then of course work with the actors. Usually when I write, I think I have actors in mind. Miss Man was an exception, obviously, but usually I try to think of actors. I have a face, and I try to, I try to write how they speak, and then sit with the actor and work it out all. So, and of course, reading is very important. Reading and watching films, both are very important. And that's only how, that's the only way you can do is be observant, especially of the life around you, and you can do so much with that. And I have benefited so much with that. Dialogue writing is really a struggle, definitely, because film dialogues are so different than the way we speak. So it just, you have to pick up from people, and that's what I do. Be observant of life around you. So that's how I sort of write the characters, because I have to write on people I know. Like especially the kind of films that I have done so far, I have to write on people that I know. And even when I'm writing a very out of the world, sci-fi film, then also it's about essentially it's all a human story. I mean, at the core of it, it's all about a human story, and it should be told in that fashion. And it's a life around us. So yeah, that's what.
Yeah, before Ravi answers, I think that goes back to the sentiment that he mentioned before, that a film is also, the expression of the director more than the characters that most people notice.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That is true. It starts with an expression of a director, but I think it becomes an expression of all your collaborator in a way, because everyone leaves a part of themselves while they're making a film. So I think it's a beautiful process. You're correct.
Yeah, I think and especially in this case where we both wrote and directed the film, right? It's not like somebody else wrote it. So yeah, when we are writing, it's the observant part that speaks a lot. And then when we are directing, the treatment of it kind of subconsciously comes from the kind of films that you like to see yourself and the kind of cinema that you prefer yourself, right? I am, a David Fincher fan, and I Bong Joon-ho fan, and so my cinema, whatever story it might be, I might end up treating it in a certain way. So the mindset when writing and when directing can be different. Of course, they have to be coherent though. But when you're writing, it's totally the observant part, because your creativity needs to get triggered by something. And what it gets triggered by is something that you see around us, right? Be it the political scenario, be it the social scenario, something that doesn't let you, I want to say something about it kind of a way. Again, I'll go back to the fact, because for me, Chuhedaani was made, I think, like a couple of years or at least 2.5 years back, right? And for like me, myself, after, all the things that have happened, I've grown myself as a person, and that then shows in kind of film that I now am working on. Because that film was more of, as I said, it started from a place of what can I make, and then try to tell a story, what I've observed and what I think the story should be about, and then treat it the way, I want to take it. But yeah, now when I see about writing a film, it comes down to what am I observing? What is the thing that is getting ingested in my creative engine, and then what comes out of it. So yeah, being observant is the number one thing for a writer, I would say, and then add that on with the eventual direction if you're directing what you wrote. But yeah, that I think Tathagat had totally encapsulated, right? I mean, what he mentioned, yeah.
And I think it's so true what Ravi said, is that when you are directing or you are editing the film, it's just writing is the only time when I'm fully emotionally there in the moment. Directing sometimes is so technical, and editing, of course, is technical. And you have seen the film hundreds of times, that in the editing, you don't even know how to react emotionally to a scene. Right. I cannot feel when I'm editing and I'm finishing. I don't know whether I feel like I have made the worst film ever when I'm finished with the film, because I don't know whether it will make people cry or laugh or what am I, because I don't know. I mean, emotionally, you become very empty by the time you finish a film. It's not the same when you start writing. You can only feel very fully alive when you're writing the film, because directing with the 10 things, whether your cast and crew have got the food on time, you have to have those things. Even if you have an AD or whatever, production manager, whatever, your mind is in 10 different places, and you cannot fully be the emotionally there in the moment when you're writing, because writing is a lonely process, so you are fully there. But editing, and the moment you finish the script, 10 other people come into the picture, and it does not only remain your film, and especially if you're writing alone, or if you have a co-writer also, then also it's between 2 or 3 people only. But after that, it's just hundreds of people on a film, and you cannot be fully emotionally alive by the time you've finished a film. You have to depend on other people to know that whether you have made a bad film or a good film, or you have a film at all. So yeah.
Right. And yeah, I mean, totally right, because it's just the writing part, and then that's where the storyboard, at least for me, kind of comes into play, right? Because when you are directing things, especially in this case, I think both of us produced the film as well, and for me, I produced the main shooting part, and then I had a co-producer come in later for the post. But then you are worried. I mean, you have to think about where people are staying, what's coming in for food, is the food there on time, and then you have to rely on, and then you have to trust your thoughts and emotions when you wrote it. Then you have to trust your thinking when you storyboarded it, right? And that's where the place it's actually, because then it's it's you and maybe 2 more people, and in the editing you don't even know what's getting delivered or not. At that point, it's just a very technical thing. Of course, you try to stick to what you thought of, and you hope that eventually things do get delivered. After a point in the film, all you see as a filmmaker, I think, are your mistakes. And you don't even know if it's getting delivered or not. But yeah, I think
you question
writing
yourself
and
constantly.
storyboarding.
You question yourself constantly.
Yeah.
And I feel that whenever every film I make, after making the first day of shoot, I feel that I have probably galti kar diya film bana ke. So
yeah, that happened. That totally happened.
But that's the fun of it.
Yeah, I think that level of self-doubt and criticism, that's something that college students will relate to a lot.
Everyone will relate to, I think. Everyone, as a matter of fact. I think it does not only restrict to film, it's just any work that you do, writing a book or paint or anything. I think so, yeah.
It's a very human concept.
Very human concept.
The most human concept.
True.
Okay, so I want to thank you both for being a part of this. It was a really great session. And now I want to let the audience know that Chuhedaani is available to watch on Vimeo. The link and password will be in the description of this panel discussion. And this event will be followed by a screening of the movie and irrelevant dialogue, which will be followed by a Q&A session with its director. So again, thank you so much for joining us.
I just want to add, sorry, I just want to add two things. One, I think we missed that one question, Nishta, you had mentioned earlier, which is for the filmmakers and especially the student filmmakers who want to kind of start, and where do you want to start? I hope we have time. Let me know if I don't. But all I want to say is go back to where you come from. And I'm not saying it has to be a very emotional story or it has to be a very, story, but just go back to what that becomes what you have. That becomes what only you have access to, right? And be it Achal Mishra's Gamak Ghar, or as Tathagata had just showed a documentary as well. And in this case also, it totally, what kind of creativity it triggers is different thing, but go back to maybe your ancestral home, go back to where you live. Absolutely. And try and see to specific stories. And second thing I wanted to say, I couldn't reply to a lot of people during the screening, and there were some questions. So feel free to reach out to me on Instagram once you've seen the movie. And if you have questions, reach out to me there.
And I think I like to add one thing. Like I saw a couple of people asking in the live chat that where can they watch Miss Man? Well, you can watch it on Movie Sense. You can we have a Facebook page of Miss Man as well. You can find information there, or you can reach out to me, as Ravi said, on Instagram as well. It's Cinema Soldier, and you can just buzz me with questions, and it's available on Movie Sense to watch. And I would like to also say one thing, echoing what Ravi, that believe in your stories. And I think people around you will say that how does it matter whether you tell this story or not? But it's on you to tell this story, because if you don't tell your story, then nobody else will. So I think you have to tell that story, because there is, I think in this discussion also, Ravi said that there will always find at least one audience for your film, and you can change a life in a little way, but then that one small change will lead to the bigger change. So I think don't give up, because every story matters, every voice matters now more than ever. And I think cinema is the most important medium in today's time to tell those stories, especially unite us all socially, politically, like in every aspect. So just believe in yourself, don't give up, and just keep telling stories. And thanks to Film Tantra, Nishta and Harsh, everyone who gave us this opportunity to be here. Much. It's a pleasure.
Part of this. It was great having you here. And like Ravi and Tathagat said, if anyone has questions, you can bother them on social media. And if you have any questions for us, you can also come text us on our social media handles. All of them will be in the description as well. So thank you so much for everyone joining, everyone who sat here for the movie and the panel discussion. Don't go anywhere, because we have a lot of exciting content coming ahead. Thank you so much.
All the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.